In this life, we generally see ourselves as victims. Victims of circumstance, of divine will, of fate, or of an apathetic cosmos. After all, everything happens to you. In Tree of Souls by Howard Schwartz, a very different story comes into focus. In the beginning, God says, "Let us make man in our image." And theories abound. Just who was the us exactly? Some say it's the council of the lesser gods that serve Hashem. Others say the angels. Christians might even say it's an inside conversation within the Trinity itself. But it gets funnier than that. It's said that there is a well of souls, and that before creation it was all of us whom God himself consulted in making the world. That is to say that every soul in existence was part of the divine assembly. We had a direct say over what this life would be. And even after the fall, we chose to be born and to become. God asked, "Whom shall I send?" And you replied, "Hineni." So, what does this imply? It means that wherever you find yourself in life, in wealth, poverty, pain, or joy, you're here because you chose to be. In the life you chose at this moment, which at one point you were just clamoring, craving to enter. The world and life don't happen to you. You're not a victim. You're precisely where you and God decided, and there's no reason for fear or self-pity, ever. Jewish mysticism and Messianic Judaism. Let's have a conversation. Hello, goys and moyles. Welcome to MJ Next, the podcast for Messianic Jews and Gentiles who are already convinced and already there. I'm your host, Drake Dunaway.
And I'm your co-host, David Cook. And by the way, if you like what you hear, find us on mjnext.fm and subscribe.
Today, we've got our first guest to grace the halls of MJ Next. We'll be conducting an in-depth interview with James Ballard, a Messianic Jewish student of Kabbalistic thought and member of Tikvat David. This particular interview is lengthy, and it'll be broken up into two parts. So first, we'll open with our headlines, David. Take it away.
Okay. Lately, the news has been dominated by one particular story, and that is the terrorist attack on Israeli citizens by Hamas, coming across the border from Gaza into Israel, and mostly the southern part of Israel, very close to the Gaza border, which happened on October 7th, I think it was. Yeah. Which was a Shabbat, and it was also it was a holy, not just a holy day, but it was the last day of Sukkot, you could say, but technically it's really what was called Shmini Atzeret. And in Israel, it was not only Shmini Atzeret, but Simchat Torah, in the diaspora outside of Israel.
Joyous day.
Those two observances are separated across 2 days because in the diaspora you celebrate holidays mostly for 2 days. Mm-hmm. First day being Shmini Atzeret, second day being Simchat Torah. But in Israel, it's combined rolled into 1 day. And so it's kind of thought of as Simchat Torah there in Israel. But it was also 50 years to the day practically from the 1973 Yom Kippur War.
Yeah.
I was looking at a news article from ABC News, and they were giving a timeline on the events that occurred, starting with October 7th. And moving forward from there. I'm not going to go through this article because I think most people are aware of what happened. And I think the introduction we gave, I think, will sort of set the stage. And besides, I'm not even sure how much reliability I want to put into the ABC News article, because they're relying upon statistics from Hamas. I'm like, okay, how trustworthy are those are those statistics? Their Gaza is claiming 1 million residents displaced, and later in the story I'm reading, ABC News says it's like 400,000. Okay, so which is it? That's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And it seems to me that even ABC News, which is not known for its accuracy in reporting, has doubts about Hamas's own numbers.
Well, I mean, from my understanding, U.S. intelligence has actually reported that, pretty much everything coming out of Hamas is a lie. It's interesting because, you imagine these conversations as they're happening in like a New York Times newsroom or something, or any newsroom throughout the United States, where we've got this this news story coming out of Gaza. Hamas says that this many Gazans have been killed by an Israeli airstrike. Great, says the editor-in-chief. Who's your source? Oh, Hamas, a terrorist organization. Oh, well, crickets, blink, blink. All right, let's run with it.
Exactly.
That's how this typically happens. I think it's a bit more nefarious than that. I don't know. I think there's something kind of triggering to the rest of the world about Jews defending themselves.
Yeah, and I don't even want to talk today about the geopolitical aspect of this. I mean, we're hearing that everywhere. Mm-hmm. And besides, I don't necessarily consider either of us to be a geopolitical expert.
No, we're not.
But I think that we can take a different approach that our listeners are not likely to hear much of any place else. I want to talk about it from a spiritual aspect. What's interesting, first and foremost, that comes to mind is the name that the terrorist organization gives to itself, which is Hamas.
Hamas.
And we think of it as an Arabic word, and perhaps it is. I'm told it's an acronym from several Arabic words, but interestingly, it creates an actual Hebrew word. And that Hebrew word is first found in the story of Noah, which, by the way, was just almost 2 weeks to the day read in synagogues after the events of that particular day on October 6th, or October 7th, rather. And the word Hamas, well, let me just give you the context. It says that in the days of Noah, reading about that particular time, it says the world was filled with Hamas. Mm-hmm. And if you know your Bibles, then you might even already have a guess as to what that word means. Because violence. In English, it says the world was filled with violence.
Violence, bloodshed,
And it's the type of violence that I think was portrayed by the terrorist group Hamas. Mm-hmm. It was such a radical form of violence that
beastly,
it caused the entire world to be destroyed. Yeah. That's how terrible and how animalistic the violence was in Noah's day, and we saw it on display there. I mean, it's like, if you want to know what Hamas from a Hebrew standpoint is, what from a scriptural standpoint what Hamas is, just watch those go back and watch those Facebook streams that were occurring back on October 7th. That is extreme violence.
Yeah. So, I mean, and I'm not suggesting, I don't think either of us are suggesting some kind of like divine conspiracy theory whereby this word somehow just filters its way through history and is emerging now. But it is just kind of an odd coincidence that Hamas, what they've chosen as their name, the name of their organization, is in fact, I believe it says the same thing in Jonah, if I'm not mistaken, as well, that the city of Nineveh was filled with Hamas, and it was filled with violence, and that was the crime of the Assyrian people at the time before heaven, and God felt that was so egregious that it was absolutely destructive, or not just absolutely destructive, but is calling down destruction is more like the world cannot stand in the present form if something like this is allowed to persist. Something's got to give. And, out of the ashes of tragedy, I will have to say this, that it kind of showed the whole world the true stripes, the true character of these people that Hamas is comprised of. For many decades, they've been portrayed as plucky freedom fighters who are resisting occupation, resistors, a ragtag group of resistors that just want their liberty. And that's not the case. And it never was the case. All that time throughout the past 30 years that Israel was being forced to negotiate with these people, the West was pressuring them to negotiate with ISIS, essentially.
Right. I mean, they don't have anyone to sit down with to negotiate in good faith. So how do you negotiate with people like that?
How do you negotiate with implacable evil? Is essentially,
right.
Yeah, they're not reasonable, and we can't give them anything in the West that they would want. Or that we can't give them anything that they would want that wouldn't result in everybody's annihilation or the end of their way of life. And so, yeah.
When you see, those, if you haven't seen the videos, I've had to try and force myself to watch some of them because they're so evil.
Yeah.
And you don't want to, you want to turn away, but you have to understand how evil it is. I mean, cutting off the heads of children or infants,
yeah.
Innocent infants,
yeah.
Cutting off their heads. I mean, who does that?
I mean, at least in looking at Ukraine, it's not good to compare these one-to-one, but Putin was he thought it would be like a couple weeks war to just go in and topple the government of Ukraine. And I think it was more of I just want to swallow up some territory and expand my empire. I think that was the motive of the Russians in storming into Ukraine. But it's a bit more insidious when it comes to that of Hamas, because it's you couldn't say that they'd necessarily gain a strategic advantage by doing it. It was just to hurt people. It was just out of pure malice. We're not capturing some oil rigs. We're not gaining some high ground from which we can shoot down on you. We're nothing like that. We're just going out to cause human pain. And that seems to be the scope of their desire. And there's no other way to really explain it.
When I look at the evil that they perpetrated, I can't even call it human. It's giving in to animalistic desires. I mean, it is, when God created man.
An animal would not set a person on fire.
No, not at all. God created order and he called it good.
Yeah.
And he created man, but man, instead of following in the footsteps of God and continuing order and honoring order,
yeah.
What does he do? He creates chaos.
Yeah.
And eventually that chaos was so evil that it was, the whole world had become like Hamas.
Yeah.
And was going around, perpetrating the kind of violence that we saw in that was on display there in Israel just recently. And that is the kind of evil that caused the world to be destroyed. And here we have in our day that very same evil that caused the world to be destroyed thousands of years ago.
Yeah.
And because of that, because that is so evil, I don't see how Israel or any freedom-loving people, God-fearing people, can allow that type of evil to go unpunished.
It's not just a matter of, for me, a question of punishing. You can't punish implies correction, and I don't think that's an organization that you can correct or chastise.
There has to be justice.
But even beyond justice, Hamas itself. I'm not talking about the Palestinian people. I'm not talking about any
Right. We're talking about Hamas.
The organization. It should no longer exist, and it should be caused to be. It should be caused to be unexisted. Let's just say that. It has no place among civilized nations or reasonable people anymore. It never did, actually. It's just now coming to light that the West has been kind of beguiling itself that they were somebody that could be sat down with. So,
right. I think it goes without saying that Hamas has to be rooted out and destroyed.
Yeah.
That type of evil cannot be allowed to exist in this world.
And not just that. I think what was more alarming is looking around and seeing, I mean, all throughout college campuses, from Harvard, Ivy League, these exclusive universities, trust fund brats is the only way I could characterize them. Getting up and knowing full well what's happened, knowing that the decapitations, the murder of children, knowing all that, and saying, "Oh well, it's just a little resistance that got out of hand," But Israel, and that's not the kind of statement that you say in the spirit of however. That's not the kind of statement you put an asterisk.
There's no moral equivalence.
Yeah, exactly. The both sidesing of this. I think that there's this academic tendency that a lot of us have in the Western world. We like to look at situations and like to cut. Well, we like to cut down the middle, essentially, and we like to fancy ourselves as enlightened, and therefore, if we see that the people of Gaza, not the people of Gaza, the Hamas did this, then we have to assume, of course, that something provoked them to do this, or that that there was some colonial oppression being brought down upon them, or something of that nature. And we sort of scratch our chins, or we point our finger in the air, and all of a sudden the sophisticated airs start coming out of different people, and we say, "Oh, this is complicated. It's a lot of back and forth. Like there's nothing complicated about it."
There's absolutely nothing complicated. I mean, we as humans recognize evil when we see it.
Yeah.
And I don't think that anyone could look at what happened and somehow reach the conclusion that there's a moral equivalence and there's a justification for that type of behavior. Simply, even if you believe in this idea of colonial oppression of the Palestinian people by the Israelis, I don't believe it for a minute. But if you did, there is no justification.
Yeah.
That there's no way to say that type of oppression can justify the response of that so-called oppression from Hamas.
You can't imagine, like in in the American Revolution, we fought the British Empire. You can't imagine, I guess, the colonists going in and cutting the heads off of British families, or if they got their hands on
the
them,
babies of British families in their cribs.
Yeah, some that degeneracy is kind of probably more part and parcel with the French Revolution, to be honest with you. But
right.
but
maybe they took infants and put them on the guillotine or something.
Yeah. I don't know what they.
I mean, we're being facetious, obviously, but
even in situations where there is somebody who's like, you could see, going back to the example of Ukraine. Ukraine is obviously the victim of I guess the imperial desires of Russia, but I think that at least they try to be more humane towards the Russians than the Russians are to them, being a bit more of a Western country, and they have cause to be angry. I mean, because they're feeling actual oppression. But, I don't know, even if you bought into the narrative, the anti-colonial hard leftist narrative that this is all just righteous indignation against Israel, nothing justifies the sheer malevolence and vile wickedness that was exhibited on October 7th.
Right. The only way I can can fathom how they could even draw that conclusion is that they know deep down that their own woke ideology is inconsistent with what they saw on display.
Yeah.
But yet they
double down.
They cannot let go of it, because that then, well, it probably in their own minds created a form of cognitive dissonance. And, that's essentially where your mind goes, I can't compute
these two different contradictory.
I have two contradictory ideas in my head, and I can't reconcile them.
Yeah.
And so my mind just sort of short circuits. So you end up having to go in. Either you have to be in denial of reality in order to embrace your own ideology, or you have to abandon your ideology.
Yeah.
And that's essentially what I think is happening, is they won't abandon their ideology, so they have to live in denial.
What's interesting also, and not to get too political or anything, but you'll find that in the United States, there's a lot of Jewish Americans who have been, I guess, traditionally liberal voters, finding themselves sort of no longer at home within the ranks of their own side of the political aisle, given that you have Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, and all these other members of Congress that, I guess, the squad that peddles in either conspiracy theory or outright maligns Israel and, by extension, the Jewish people, which is a pattern with them. So, I mean, it's mind-blowing, but at the same time, I try to find some silver lining in that. At least it's revealed to the world the ugliness of anti-Semitism, and that is vital that it be daylighted and that people see it. Let me add to that, if I can. People need to hold on. I think that people need to see the images.
Yes,
I think they need to see, maybe not kids. Kids don't need to watch it, but I think grown adults need to see those images, need to see the dead children, need to see the bodies, the burned bodies, people that were set on fire, just the inimical cruelty of Hamas, and they need to have that seared into their minds and see what Jew hatred looks like. Because it always goes to an ugly, ugly place.
And let's be clear that most of what we're seeing is Jew hatred. It is not. We are seeing some Israeli anger
at Israel.
But by and large, we are seeing Jew hatred, anti-Semitism on display. And you know how you can tell? Because you don't hear death to the Israelis. You hear death to the Jews,
or death to the Jewish state, or
I'm generally hearing death to the Jews everywhere. Not to the Israelis, not to the Jewish state, but to Jews.
Well, even they cloak it though. They'll say like from the West Bank to the sea, Palestine will be free. Now that wouldn't. Assuming like Israel were to abolish its military tomorrow, everybody says, well, if Israel were to lay down its arms, when those college students march around saying from the West Bank to the sea, Palestine will be free, that's code speak. That's code speak for Palestine will be free. That is, there will be no Jews in this land, period. And so if Israel were to just, I don't know, this shows that if they were to abolish their military tomorrow, this is what they would become prey for. There wouldn't be some graceful handover or anything like that. It would be an absolute pogrom. It would be absolute just sheer blood in the streets.
It would be an annihilation of the Jewish people.
Yeah,
if they laid down their arms and says, okay, we just want peace. We lay down our arms. We tear down the walls. They would be killed.
Yeah, exactly. And so this reminds the world of the stakes.
Imagine the opposite. Imagine Hamas laying down their arms and the Palestinian people laying down their arms.
Well, they might just get opportunities in school and education and jobs and business.
It wouldn't happen to me. I mean, it had to be, first you'd have to realize, okay, this is not a trick. We're for real here.
Yeah.
But once you came to that conclusion, there would be prosperity.
Yeah.
throughout the Palestinian world.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it's a world we can dream for one day, perhaps. But
Yeah.
at this point, I don't see any hope for this.
I
don't know what the solution is.
I think there is one step to wherever we want to get to be is that Hamas definitely needs to no longer exist. And, we can decide whatever happens after that, how this is managed, how I don't think Israel wants to occupy that territory. It'd be a handful for them, but
they tried to essentially force a two-state solution.
Yeah, it didn't happen
on them.
Yeah,
they don't want a two-state solution. It's been proven over and over again.
They just want to hate on the Jewish people. They'd rather do that than have their own.
Right. They want the whole enchilada. They want everything.
Everything. And So anyway, it's a sad topic, and we encourage you at MJ Next to do what you can to reach out if you have any friends that are Jewish, and just let them know that you support them, that they're not alone, and just as well, there are plenty of charities as well that even here at Tikvat David, for example, from where we're broadcasting, we donate ourselves to different charity organizations that choose to help Israel right now in its plight. And so, with that said, that's a pretty heavy topic, and it's probably going to be in the news cycle for some time, and we'll continue to discuss it. But we don't want to let the whole thing drag us down. So we're going to segue now to the primary segment of our show, the interview that we're having with Mr. James Ballard on Jewish mysticism for Messianic Judaism, and its role in Messianic Judaism. We talk about mysticism in general. It's one of those topics that, either people are fascinated by it, or people, especially people that come into MJ from Christianity, it sounds so exotic and so foreign, and people's hackles might stand up, and it might rankle them, and that's not in my Bible, and all that. So before we start off, I want two things to be clear. We here at MJ Next, we act in the spirit of open-mindedness, and that means that we include diverse voices from around our orbit. And so some of the opinions and ideas expressed herein are not always those of MJ Next. And two, whatever your opinions are, we will regard you as though you too are acting in good faith. We'll give you the benefit of the doubt as well. So with that, we begin our segment. Now for our main segment. We have a very special guest today and a fellow member of Tikvat David. Please allow us to introduce our friend James Ballard. He is a husband and father of three, a Messianic Jew, and though Jewish by birth, he grew up in Catholicism and eventually returned to his own Jewish roots. Today, James is the published author of Exploration of the Soul, Discovering the Nature of the Human Soul Through the Wisdom of the Bible and Jewish Literature. He's also the founder and curator of The Hidden Orchard Project, an online hub for blog articles, podcasts, and various resources in Jewish wisdom. The Hidden Orchard Project offers a fresh look at spirituality, the Bible, emerging sciences, wellness, meditation, and a wide variety of relevant topics. Discover more at thehiddenorchard.com. James possesses a keen talent for framing the New Testament within its first-century Jewish context and Jewish mystical understanding. And today, he's going to be discussing Jewish mystical thought within Messianic Judaism, its implications, and the readiness of MJ audiences to receive it. James, welcome. It's good to have you on MJ Next.
Thanks, guys. You have a great setup here. It's professional. I'm looking forward to our discussion.
Well, you are actually our first guest on MJ Next, and so pat yourself on the back. You'll probably be part of a long series of them, but it's definitely, this is our maiden voyage actually hosting somebody else. So
Great.
If it's awkward, I'm sure it can be forgiven. Let's talk a little bit about yourself, James. How did you first land in Jewish mysticism?
Yeah, wow, what a winding road. Like you said, I grew up in the Catholic Church. My mom's side was Jewish and my dad was Catholic. So I would say we didn't have a very strong, deep religious background. We went to church on Sunday. It was just something you did, right? That's the generation I grew up in. And
So you followed your dad's religion.
that's right. That's right. So we knew we had Jewish. We knew we came from the Holocaust. We came to the U.S. after and probably before the Holocaust. Different parts of our family in waves. Obviously, some didn't make it, sadly, but we knew it was in our background. But we went with Catholicism because my mom's side was sort of agnostic to religion, if not angry at God. So we kind of had that in our psyche.
Mm-hmm.
But even as a kid, I had questions about the Jewish people. I still wondered how they factored into the plan. We read about them every week liturgically in the Catholic Church, but it seemed as if this question wasn't really answered in Sunday school. So I had this question. I went to a Catholic high school, actually, as well. Long story short, I came out of that, spent a number of years in sort of agnostic space, studying Eastern religion.
Yeah.
And then I came back to Protestant Christianity and then found Messianic Judaism. So a very long, winding road. I was not somebody who was pre-wired, at least not at a conscious level, to be mystically inclined. It was not part of my nature. It just became something that, as I kept uncovering it in Jewish thought, it made a lot of sense. And then eventually it became second nature. And then I feel very much at home in that space. And I think that I had this winding road for a reason, because then I can take this space I'm in now and kind of explain it backwards into Protestantism and then Catholicism. But it wasn't my natural course. I wasn't always such a hippie.
So how many years do you suppose you've been in it, so to speak?
Messianic Judaism?
Well, I guess Messianic Judaism one, and then of course Jewish mysticism. Those are two different questions.
I would say, so it's funny because I would say maybe 10 years in Jewish mysticism, but then I realized how much of it is in the New Testament and in the Bible.
Yeah.
And then it moves that time stamp back further.
Yeah.
Because you realize, I've been learning this all my life.
Oh, I see.
So you find them in the teachings of Jesus? Or
Absolutely.
Paul?
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
100%.
Yeah. So you've talked about a little bit about your background and how it resonates with you, Jewish mystical thought. Where are some places that you learn, some resources that you turn to when you discuss this? Because a lot of people listening to this for the first time, maybe coming into Messianic Judaism, blinking and kind of coming out of their womb, so to speak, don't really know where to look or what the sources are. So what do you study?
Yeah. Very good. Sorry, my allergies are kicking in. I jumped in, I think like most people, you go to Chabad and you start reading articles and you realize initially these are way over my head. I ended up going to a yeshiva, so a Messianic yeshiva, which really focused on anti-Semitism, replacement theology, and some of the deeper challenges you have in the Messianic world. And that was through St. Pete's Seminary and Yeshiva in Florida.
Yeah.
So we really started learning some of the content there, even though it was not the forefront. It was the content we were learning. You couldn't help but notice that the rabbi would quote the Zohar.
Yeah.
And he would quote a Midrash, and the Midrash would connect to the Zohar, and then you would see it in the New Testament.
Yeah.
So those sources became very helpful. I encourage everyone to find, if not St. Pete's, there are many other places you can learn online.
Yeah.
Like kosher seminary yeshivas. I also have, I'm part of a program with a Jewish organization, Aish HaTorah.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a guy I learn with through that, and we have great discussions.
Okay.
So I'm kind of in all worlds. I kind of cringe a little bit at the label of a Messianic Jew,
Yeah.
because I think the term Messianic has been kind of sullied, if you will, over the last 10 years.
It's got baggage.
Oh, yeah, for sure. So I think, given my background, I consider myself a Jew, but I can understand how the New Testament is an aspect of how it fits into the Messianic tapestry, and we'll talk about that.
I mentioned maybe a couple of years ago that I look forward to the day when Messianic Judaism isn't called Messianic Judaism, it's just called Judaism, or it's just a Judaism. It doesn't have that self-conscious label, on the front of it, qualifying.
Right.
it.
It's like it has to be a qualifier in front of it.
Yeah.
Why do we need that?
An asterisk.
It's a wall.
It is.
In some cases, it's an absolute brick wall.
Yeah. Definitely. So talk a little bit about your website and what you're hoping to achieve and what you do there.
So the website is an attempt, and I think it's going pretty well so far. I have a lot of subscribers who exceeded my expectations so far. So I'm very happy with that. But the idea is to take these ideas, consolidate them into about 1,000 words or less, which is a challenge. It's a good thing for me to learn how to do, and share them back to the audiences that I interact with. And I wanted to go through and sweep through all the main issues that I think need to be corrected. Concepts like original sin, as I learned it in the church, needs some correction.
Yeah.
These things that really set the Jewish and the Christian groups apart and really blocking conversation. Understanding Messiah from a Jewish concept, understanding eternal damnation, these topics we talk about quite often here at Tikvat. But I felt there was a need to take information I had learned in the Jewish world, reframe the New Testament inside of that, putting it back into its Jewish context, and then reintroducing it back to audiences who are open. And that's the key, audiences who are open. Yeah. Because I think we're entering a time, the prophets spoke about this, the Zohar speaks about this, we're entering a time when knowledge and light will come back into this world as we move towards the Messianic era. Yeah. And a lot of traditions are going to topple, and I'm seeing that. I mean, we're seeing that here. Yeah. People are coming in from wherever they came from, and they want to learn because they knew something, but they knew they didn't have all the cards of the deck.
Yes.
So that's what the goal of the site is. And then I have free articles, which really combat anti-Semitism and replacement theology. Those are free.
Sure.
And then paid content. You can subscribe and get more content. And there's paid content where I put more of the Kabbalistic ideas behind the New Testament, just because I want to kind of weed out some of the people who aren't interested in learning. They just want to argue. So
tell us the website again.
thehiddenorchard.com.
Yes.
Yeah. And it's a podcast. I put some of the free ones out there in podcast, but a lot of it is Kabbalistic, New Testament Kabbalistic, and then Jewish values and ethics like Musar.
Now, just so we're all on the same page, how would you define Jewish mysticism? What is it as such?
Yeah, so the word Kabbalah is somewhat of a bad word in some circles.
Yeah.
It just simply means received or reception. Like if you go to hotels in Israel, in Hebrew, it says Kabbalah. It's pointing to the reception desk, right? There's nothing mystical about that. It's just...
So to receive revelation or to receive insight or to receive...
Tradition,
yeah.
Absolutely. It's part of the tradition. And, on Kabbalah Shabbat, there's the word again. It's actually quite common in the Hebrew. It's not... It has baggage in English.
Yeah.
But the word itself is very normal. And really, this is the crux of the argument I'm sure we'll talk about. There is an academic view of the Torah and the Bible.
Yeah.
And the academic view somewhat stands opposite of the rabbinic view. The academic view is sort of we only trust what has been peer-reviewed and time-stamped as having been part of this era. Whereas the rabbinic view says, no, this tradition was oral and goes way beyond that, back to Sinai, even in some cases back to Adam.
Yeah.
And there's kind of a standoff between academia and Torah Judaism as to when the Kabbalah existed. Yeah. Academics might say, it's Middle Ages.
Yeah.
All of the great Kabbalists cite this back to the sages, Chazal, back to the Talmud and before the Talmud, right? Like back to Hillel and Shammai.
Yeah.
And it turns out that a lot of those later produced printed materials in the Middle Ages, those ideas that are being explained, the first iteration of them we see in print is actually the New Testament.
Let's say that somebody is listening to this podcast right now. They're either new to Messianic Judaism or been in it for a while, but are new to Jewish mystical thought, just haven't explored that frontier. Where do they even start? It seems like a very vast universe of thought. Like, what are some places? Like, sometimes I get asked by my friends, Drake, I'd like to know more about Greek thought and Greek mythology and philosophy. Like, do I just pick up Plato or do I read Homer? Like, where do I start? And so it's a big hamburger to bite into.
Sure. Yeah. And, selfless, self-centered plug here, I guess. I have built the website for that, for the goal of pulling in an idea that's practical and then telling where I got the source. So it's not me that said it. This is the source, and people can go down that road and kind of pick and choose.
Okay.
So I try to make that available there. Some of the books I recommend for people if they just want to jump in, you might look at something like The Way of God by Ramchal, like Rabbi Lozato. I think he's got a very scientific way of breaking down if you like that sort of style.
Yeah.
The writings of the Baal Shem Tov, or not his own writings, but of people who've captured his stories.
Yeah.
That's another great place. It's a different type of place because, and this is probably something we haven't said yet, all of this tradition goes way back, right?
Yeah.
This oral tradition. Something happened in the 1500s around the time of the Arizal, Rabbi Rabbi Isaac Luria. He came and he had an understanding of this material and explained it in a way and put forward some concepts that had been spoken about, but he put it in a new way of understanding it.
Yeah.
And from him have come 4 different schools of thought: the Baal Shem Tov, the Ramchal, the Vilna Gaon, and the Rebbe Rashash. And they each have their own style. I think the Baal Shem Tov, which became he was the founder of Hasidic Judaism.
Yeah.
Right? Chabad goes back to him. Breslov essentially goes back to people in his line. What happens is they make it practical and applicational. So I think if you're starting off and you've never heard these concepts but you're interested, the works of Rebbe Nachman are good. Stories from the Baal Shem Tov are very good. A lot of Chabad writings are very good. They're Kahot publishing. But from there, there's really a whole world of ideas. And we just have to remember we have the luxury of thousands of years of these being developed further. These were passed down through oral transmission to people who had mastered, like David said, those other rungs of the ladder sufficiently by a certain age and showed a predisposition, a spiritual depth. That's the other thing that doesn't necessarily work with the academic worldview. You can take a book off a shelf and learn it. This Torah Judaism, this Kabbalistic, this worldview, it requires that you have the spiritual foundation, that you've proven yourself to be the type of person we can teach this to.
Yeah.
And that's not uncommon in Eastern traditions. Drake,
Yeah.
I think we were talking about this.
Yeah.
Martial arts and your interest there.
Yeah. Actually, I do want to hone in on this and elaborate this point a bit more, because I think you did mention that there's, obviously skepticism about, these are relatively newfangled ideas. They're just a bunch of medieval metaphysical ideas that were kludged together and pseudepigraphically, attributed to past authors and ancient thinkers. I find that there's, to some extent, I'm just kind of tired of hearing that because, when it comes to oral tradition, for example, let's say look at Homer. Okay, the events of the Iliad and the Odyssey. There was a Trojan War. We can go to Troy and see that it was destroyed. It was sacked. That happened in about like the 11th century, and basically the Greek Dark Age, the Mycenaean civilization, But it was actually written down by Homer, the poet, supposedly around like 600, 700 BC, something like that. So there was a latency, a lag time of 400, 500 years, 5 centuries between the actual events, and then you have these traveling bards and songs around campfires, and then somebody actually decided, when Athens was starting to come to the fore, let's actually write this down. And so writing something down wouldn't by any means tell the whole story of it. There's lag time. Another good example, as you brought up earlier, was martial arts. Of course, I'm in martial arts, but if you go by just what is written down and what can be totally confirmed, you can look at martial arts as a tradition that began in the 19th or maybe 20th century. Which that's ridiculous. We know that there was a period of warring houses in Japan, and that a lot of people had a lot of skills and techniques in fighting each other on the battlefield in very, very distinctive ways. But that was passed down orally, pedagogically through the samurai class, through fathers, through sons, things of that nature. It wasn't just something that I'm going to go take a class from, there's a local strip mall and there's a little Taekwondo class and it's going to be available to everybody. That's not how it was done.
Yeah, you don't want that getting into the wrong hands.
You want to get the peasants to get a hold of it, and so even listening to, I think, Eitan Bar, and he was debating rabbis, and he always puts himself in opposition to rabbis. He would always have like this arms race with them of, the New Testament was written down earlier. And it's like, well, it doesn't matter when it was written down, because it could be anything, it could go back 100, 200, 300 years before anybody said, okay, let's actually commit it to pen. And so...
and you weren't allowed to write. That was a rabbinic tradition. You weren't allowed to write down your teacher's words at that time.
No.
Because they could be misunderstood or misconstrued. Yeah. Only in the time when it became dire that the Jews were being killed off by the Romans so rapidly did they, with great risk to their lives, teach and then write and then compile the Mishnah.
And prior to that time, it had to be memorized.
Right.
So you would hear the teachings from your teacher, memorize them, and you would pass them on to eventually your students, and then they would pass them on and so forth. So you'd be handing down generations of oral tradition for hundreds of years, and eventually, like you said, it had to be written down. And like Drake was saying, who knows how old it is by the time it's finally written down.
Yeah.
And the eastern part of the church doesn't have a problem with oral tradition.
No.
It's the Western. So when you say people challenge an oral tradition, it's really the Western, and it's a lot of times, in my experience, Protestant Christianity that is the big block. And of course, Messianic Judaism comes largely from Protestant Christianity. It imports that sort of anti-traditional resistance to rabbinic oral tradition.
Do you know what pivotal figure actually came out of Protestantism? Julius Wellhausen.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I believe that's true. I'd have to go back and look, but I'm pretty sure that he was a staunch Protestant, and so he had his own views.
It makes sense. I don't think the Catholic Church had such a position. Like that.
Yeah.
I have a question. You mentioned that there has to be some sort of way to keep the uninitiated out, the people that haven't shown themselves worthy of learning this type of stuff.
Yep.
Yeah.
Why then is it that we see celebrities studying
like
Kabbalah?
Like Madonna, she wears a little red bracelet.
Exactly.
Well, so it's a really good question, because if you think back to the Gospels, the disciples ask Jesus, they say, hey, why do you teach them in parables, right? In other words, why aren't you just openly teaching them? And he says, they haven't been given the keys to the kingdom.
Yeah.
And he said things that sent droves of people off because they weren't ready to hear this teaching. Like I said, there's this spiritual, it's right there in the New Testament multiple times. And nothing he taught was without a parable, it says, right? So that was in that time, though.
Yeah.
Today, we're in a different era. We're in the end. So if you look at the Jewish tradition, 6 days of creation, 6,000 years corresponds to the week of creation.
Yeah.
We're on the edge of Messiah's arrival, according to Jewish tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So in Daniel 12, 3-4, it says that. And I have a quote here. He's giving Daniel the information, and the righteous will have this knowledge. And he says, but you, Daniel, keep the word secret and seal the book until the time of the end. Many will run to and from, and knowledge will increase. So he's saying at the end of this arc of time, we're going to get to an era where we have to teach everybody. And there's a rabbi, Rav Ginsburg. He's a great Kabbalist. He's alive in our time.
Yeah.
An amazing Kabbalist. His website is Gal-Ani, GALEAINI, something to that effect, .org. Really great teacher. He said a few years ago, we've entered the window where Gentiles need to learn the Kabbalah. The Vilna Gaon says this. So some groups like the Kabbalah Center, which is what you're talking about, some will criticize them. I'm not going to say that it's not valuable, but I would say that it is problematic because it extracts that personal development without Torah and mitzvot.
Can I ask a follow-up question? Why would they say that? I mean, I guess I can draw the conclusion that because Messiah is nearly here, or we're on the cusp of the Messianic revelation, that's why we have to teach Gentiles Kabbalah?
Yeah, and the reason is, now obviously some people aren't too thrilled about it, but the reason is the Messianic era is it's nothing more than global consciousness being returned, right? Think of all the times in the Bible people were separated from God. They were put under some kind of divine counsel, separated, scattered, their language confounded. We were talking about that.
Oh, yeah.
Babel. And it talks about, all the prophets are talking about a time when the people are brought back in. So the way that they're brought back in, and we'll talk about this, is they're given an insight, they're given some kind of influx of divine presence that allows them to recognize God and come back. But that can only come back through the wisdom of God. And the Kabbalah is that higher level dimensional, higher dimensional wisdom that Messiah will bring and teach people.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. So one of the questions that I had was, what are some of the ways that Kabbalah is around us right now? Perhaps like in Jewish orthopraxy and like what, Havdalah, the Passover, say, like, how is this weighed in on Jewish custom and tradition? Because I could see so many people that would be leery of this, but at the same time be doing customs in Messianic Judaism that were heavily influenced. You know, I'm going to look at my fingernails in the candlelight. Where does that come from? I mean, so take that and run with it.
Everything, literally everything. I mean, sometimes it comes to the surface when we're counting the Omer, right?
Yeah.
So we're counting the Sephirot. We're counting the superstructure of how all of creation has been organized. And we're counting it through those 49 configurations of the Sephirot to the 50.
All right, elaborate on, you just said a term that a lot of our listeners probably aren't familiar with.
Yeah.
Explain what Sephirot are.
Yeah, so the Sephirot, so the whole idea of the Kabbalah is to understand how the Creator interacts with the creation. So there's your definition, going back to the beginning of what I would say Kabbalah is. It's understanding how the Creator interacts with us. How can an infinite Creator create finite beings who are capable of evil, like terrible evil, right?
Mm-hmm.
How can those things exist together?
Yeah.
So the sages looked at all of these attributes. Well, the Creator is kind, but he also brings judgment, right? We see both of those, chesed and gevurah.
Yeah.
There are times that we get positive reward for what we did, and there are times we get judged for it. And it creates this seesaw, this balance, the scales of sort of how the world operates.
Yeah.
And how we act can impact that. This is, again, going into the spiritual world, like you said. How does what we do in the physical? Mm-hmm. So all of the mitzvot play into that.
Yeah.
Every mitzvot we do plays into that. And there are some that are proactive mitzvot, the 248 things that we should do. Mm-hmm. And then there are the 365 things we should avoid doing because they bring spiritual impurity.
I see.
So everything we do is related to the Kabbalah. Now, every tradition, when we wake up in the morning, we wash our hands. So why do we wash our hands? Mm-hmm. What do you think?
I don't know. I've heard different. I'm preparing myself spiritually for the day. I've heard that I would speculate that perhaps sleep is like a little death, and therefore I'm okay. What?
Perfect.
I've heard that, like, to expand what Drake was talking about, sleep being a form of a mini death.
Yep.
That your spirit leaves your body and enters the realm of the spiritual, and comes back just before you wake up, and there's a residue of that taintedness from the spiritual realm that are still in your fingertips.
So you might say,
you need to wash them.
Yeah. So like in the Shachris, for example, you would say, "Thank you for returning my soul to my body." It seems like a mundane detail, but it's hearkening back to that belief.
Yeah. And the night before you go to sleep, you say, protect. Here, I leave my soul to you. Right. There's this idea that we're making a deposit. Mm-hmm. And then we get it back in the morning. Yeah. But so it's part of our daily tradition. It's part of, you wake up and you put your right shoe on your left shoe, but then you tie the left shoe and then you tie the right shoe. There's a whole. Yeah. So the Sephirot are these attributes that kind of represent this balance, this masculine, feminine, the positive, the negative, the giving, the receiving. And they're used, it's like the theory of everything. Yeah. It can be used in how we interact with the Creator. It can be used how the Creator interacts with us.
How we interact with other people.
And this is the beauty. So you said the soul, the spirit. If you look at the New Testament, there are different words used for soul and spirit. Right?
Right.
What's the difference?
In English, psyche,
nefesh, neshama.
Right.
Ruach.
So the Bible, the Tanakh, the Hebrew Bible, has 5 different words that could be translated as soul.
Yeah.
It's not happenstance. Every one of those levels of the soul is connected to something we do. So the nefesh is the level of our physical activity. So we can do mitzvah, we can pray.
Yeah.
That's great. Those are good things to do. You start there. Kids start there, right?
Yeah.
Then the next level is the ruach. That's our emotional speech level. So then we do something, and then we do it from the right emotional place, right? Now we've recruited the next level of the soul. Neshama, if we put our intellect, neshama, intellect, into that, we're doing something with intention. Now we've just taken that prayer that we do in the morning, I wash my hands. It's good to wash your hands, right? Who knows what happened to them in your sleep?
Yeah.
But now you're doing it with the intention that I'm purifying myself, and the Creator gave me back my soul.
Yeah.
And now I'm going to employ that soul to more good things today. So, and then the other two levels of the soul become more of the space of Messiah. But the reality is, it's as deep as you want to go.
Yeah.
There are certainly people who pray and do mitzvot on the pashat level, on the lowest simple level, the level of nefesh. But the Kabbalah is teaching us that there's more to that.
Yeah.
And the levels of the soul are the ladder. So you said that earlier, David. Jacob's vision in the tradition is he sees a ladder. Yeshua calls on that same ladder when he's talking to his soon-to-be apostles. But if you think about it, this is the underlying factor of his teaching at the Sermon on the Mount. You've heard it said, committing adultery is bad. I'm telling you, thinking about it, why would he say that? Because you're recruiting higher levels of the soul. You're doing real damage with your thoughts. In the Peshat level, in the simple, plain meaning of the text, it makes sense to us. But the Jewish tradition behind that is much deeper than we read it. You see what I'm saying?
I think so. As a follow-up, I'm thinking of Midrash. And, Midrash is an elaboration of filling in the gaps that we find in the Torah and throughout Scripture. It just leaves out so many details. And so Midrash will find some hint of something and expand with a story.
Yeah.
Now, those stories aren't meant to be taken literally. They illustrate a truth, and they expand on our understanding of Scripture. That's their intent, not to be taken literally. So I guess in light of that, like when you talk about the washing of the hands, for example, and we're cleansing our hands from exposure to the spiritual realm, the residue that's remaining. Is it like Midrash in that we shouldn't take that literally, but that we're just illustrating some deeper meaning, or should we take it literally? Because I've never really understood in that sense.
Yeah, it's challenging because sometimes Midrash are taken as halakhic, right? We take what we learn from a Midrash and we make Jewish law from it. I will say this too. There, at the time of the New Testament, certain topics were inextricably midrashic, remez, and so it was all part of the same tapestry. You couldn't really find the boundary line. Like we look back as Western people and we put boxes around this and that.
Yeah, they all kind of seem to blend and flow into each other, don't they?
They do. It's inevitable.
Yeah.
So look at Yeshua's teaching about washing of hands. In Mark 7, they're talking about traditions of men. And they start off with, hey, your students don't wash their hands. Now, on a physical level, that's an argument between Hillel and Shammai. So some may be from the school of Hillel and some may be from Shammai. There's a lot of depth to that. I wrote about it. But if you go on the higher level, he spins the whole argument. It has nothing to do with kosher food, unfortunately. We grew up in the church being told, oh, he made everything clean. You can eat whatever you want. That's not true. Because he scolds them for undoing God's commands, and then we're to believe paragraph later, he does it.
It's the same thing.
Obviously, they didn't see that, or they would have jumped on that very obvious hypocritical statement. So what you're seeing, he says, it's not about the hands. It's not the things that go in you. It's what comes out of the heart. So he starts talking about spiritual tuma, thoughts, licentious behavior, lustful thoughts, gossip. Everything he talks about is spiritual tuma. Things that you commit with higher levels of the soul. You could put them into a category. Now, people make sermons about them, and it's great because on the lowest level, unaware of that framework of the soul and how these things align, on the lowest level, great, I shouldn't gossip. I shouldn't have evil thoughts, right? We get it. You can still use it on the lower level. But concealed behind that is a vast framework of Jewish tradition that you can only learn from within the Jewish tradition. And when you see his writings and the writings that were made of his teachings, you see, wow, he really understood these things. He was learning, he was drinking from that same pool. So the same pool as the Zohar. You'll see a lot of these ideas in the Zohar.
In every thought and deed, something infinite is at stake.
For sure. Yeah, for sure.
So I'd like to ask now, so people obviously might be leery of when you hear the term Kabbalah. As you said, it has a lot of baggage. So just differentiate it for us. Like, how is this not sorcery or not witchcraft? Because people they'll think of Ouija boards, they'll think of summonings and drawing a pentacle on the ground and saying, I summon thee 3 times and killing a chicken, all these things. So how is this not that?
Well, I mean, I guess at the end of the day, we have to let the Torah define what witchcraft is, right? The Torah has a definition for witchcraft. The Gemara, there are a lot of conversations like this in the Talmud and the Gemara.
Yeah.
Talmud is the Gemara, right? So they talk about healing. When is it okay to heal people? Is there any time we can use how the nations heal people the right way? Is there a way we can use astrology the right way, right? Because all of this is in the Jewish tradition.
Yeah.
And as long as you're extracting the avodah zarah, the foreign worship, the things that God said not to do, or the things that are not attributed to God.
Yeah.
There's no, that's very vague, right? I just made it very, so I would say read the lessons in the Gemara and it makes it a little more clear.
Yeah.
But it's not witchcraft in the way we popularly look at witchcraft. We think you can simply just control nature and you can create, I don't know, angels and demons that do your will, right? There are things like that are just not available to us. Yeah. And any of the teachings that were in that ballpark, trust me, they've been concealed and buried.
Yeah.
The Jewish tradition is very good. It's one of the best kept secrets that all of this material exists. But anything that was in that ballpark has been, or could even be taken down that path, has been removed.
Yeah. Okay.
I mean, I know it's probably not the best answer, but witchcraft really is it's a term that is in the eye of the beholder.
Yeah, yeah. I think, though, that the radical, what people don't understand is, if you were to read the Golden Bough, for example, and get a sense of what that means to name something in, let's say, ancient religion or the occult, I'm going to find your name, or I'm going to discover your name, or ask your name, or name something. Just controlling the names alone would have been seen as exerting power over reality. Yeah. So if a shaman were to read the story of Adam and Eve, he would say, oh, this Adam must have been the founder of magic because he's going around and naming everything. Like, if I'm a shaman and I have somebody's name, I have power over them. But this guy gave all the names. He's the founder of the grand metaphysical. So the radical idea of, I think, the Torah, and the message of monotheism that came through the Jewish people, is the fact that in a almost magical sense, that your words do have power over reality. Your words and your thoughts and your actions, in almost a semi-magical way. Yeah. God speaks, things are. Man speaks, things are. Man prays, things happen. Things of that nature.
Abracadabra.
Abracadabra. Abracadabra is actually a bara ki davar, or something like that from Hebrew. It means, as I speak, so I create. But that's straight out of Genesis. So yeah, okay, all right. So are there any guardrails on Kabbalah? You could maybe give some examples.
Yeah, I would say that who you are learning from is important, because you should always seek out trusted sources. Now, we're in an age where there are more people who are diving into this space, like myself. I'm not even the first, and I won't be the last, hopefully. There are people who are putting these pieces back together in the New Testament, because I will say, and this is my opinion, disclaimer, a lot of the misunderstandings, the very tragic misunderstandings that have come from people reading the New Testament has come from them not understanding the proper framework of Jewish mysticism and tradition around these ideas. Mm-hmm. The idea that Hebrews is saying that the Old Covenant is done away with, right? Yeah. Hebrews leverages the framework of how how everything was created, the worlds. It says it, worlds, right? These different realms that God created from creation. So if you don't know that background, it says the Olam Haba, or the world to come, versus the present world. When I was in the church, I had never been taught these concepts.
Yeah.
But if you don't understand them, you can read Hebrews in its literal sense and say, oh, the old covenant's done away with. We don't need to keep the Torah anymore.
Yeah.
And then when a Jew walks into a church, you've
Shut the door.
used the New Testament to prove to them that they don't need to do mitzvot or watch what they eat anymore. And that's a very sad reality. And Yeshua himself said, I didn't come to abolish even a single letter. So I think a lot of, we go back to I'm not going to say witchcraft, but things that are just as detrimental spiritually are misinterpreting the Bible to anti-Semitic conclusions, anti-Torah, right? These are very devastating things, which have earned Messianic Judaism some bad stripes, because we still struggle with that in our ranks.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So we've established that it isn't bad or malevolent per se. So now I'd like to I'm going to take a little bit of a different tack right here. And we're just going to kind of go through like a little thunder run, so to speak, of the rogues gallery of perhaps some of the more prominent mystical thoughts within Jewish culture. And so I'm going to start with, let's say, the four worlds, Kav, Tzimtzum, and Ein Sof. Pick up from there.
Okay. So when we look at the way the world, so we had this in one of our teaching hours. Someone said the word for heaven is Shemayim.
Mm-hmm.
Someone said, why is that plural in Hebrew? Heavens. Why does it say heavens?
Yeah.
So that was a good question. In the English, it's always singular.
Singular, right.
There's no reason to make it plural. But in the Hebrew, you see, we have a thing here to investigate. The way, going back to the beginning, God created Adam.
Mm-hmm.
He put Adam in some kind of a supernatural, but also natural integration. Adam was created with a unique context that we have never seen, because none of us made it to that point, right? We haven't made it there, and we never started with that.
Perfect reflection of God. Yeah.
You could walk with God.
Yeah.
His soul and body composition allowed him to walk with the Creator. So he had proximity.
Mm-hmm.
The sin in the garden cast them out, right?
Mm-hmm.
These are very deep metaphors and very deep traditions.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the soul has been damaged. So the soul from everybody post-Adam is missing some components that he had and had potential to reach, right? If, according to tradition, Adam had created his space and he did exactly what he was supposed to do, and he protected and he kept as he was told, he would have moved everyone into that, what we call now the Messianic era.
Yeah.
So all that, down the road, here we are, we're waiting for the second Adam. And you can see that in Paul's language, right?
Yeah.
The second, the person who will do those things, a man who is given the opportunity to subjugate his will to the Creator's will.
Yeah.
So, I mean, it really goes down, every page of the Bible has some element of depth behind it,
Yeah.
if you know what I'm getting to.
Sure.
Now, as a result, our soul, the 5 levels of our soul, are fragmented. In order for us to, I guess it's matriculate through those levels, right? Move from one to the next and elevate, we have to become aware of our deeds, and we have to become aware of our actions and words and emotions, and then our thoughts. And through doing that, we actually connect, we're moving ourselves towards the Creator. So I'm going to do this commandment, this mitzvah. Right now, I'm going to give money. Okay, now my next level is I'm going to give money cheerfully with the right emotion. I'm not going to do it from a place of like, I have to do this, or I should do this, or whatever. Then I'm going to do it with intention, considering the person's dignity, right? And we see this in the Jewish tradition. Maimonides talks about this, the levels of giving.
Yeah.
What he's teaching you is how to recruit these levels of the soul and elevate.
Sure.
And I think we can all look back on ourselves years ago and say, wow, we're not that person anymore.
Yeah.
Little by little, we've climbed this ladder.
Okay.
So all that to say, when it comes down to it, we are in this broken state, right?
Sure.
It's very different from original sin. Original sin would say that we can't do anything good to get out of this situation.
Yeah.
The Jewish world says, no, our soul actually has a lot of potential to be holy. We have to work towards that. And you can see, again, why I say traditional teachings that do away with mitzvot and prohibitions are damaging. It leaves us dead in the water. So the worlds, we're in the present world, the Olam Hazeh. And the Olam Haba is the time we move through the Messianic era into that eternal reality where all of this brokenness, our soul brokenness, creation's brokenness is fixed. And there's some verses here from Hebrews. Again, Hebrews is really deep in this. Hebrews assumes you understand this structure.
Sure.
It says, for he did not put the world to come, so there it is, the Olam Haba, about which we are speaking, under the control of angels.
Yeah.
So whoever wrote Hebrews knows that there's a world to come, the Olam Haba.
Yeah.
And knows that it's not under the control of angels. Now, where did they get that idea from?
Yeah.
How do they know the structure of who owns this world, right? There's a lot of depth behind it.
Yeah.
But he says, he did not put the world to come about which we're talking. So a lot of what Hebrews is talking about is going in and out of the contrast of
The
this
present
transition.
age
Yeah.
and the future age, not the present covenant and the future covenant, as people think.
Yeah, and it's talking about this. We're on the cusp of, and we're always perpetually on the cusp of, but our generation is really on the cusp of it at this point because time's running out.
Yeah.
We're on the cusp of this consciousness shift, and that's what these worlds are.
Yeah.
And we get back to that Adam consciousness through the work of Messiah. And there's another verse, Hebrews 11:3. The other one was Hebrews 2:5, and this is 11:3.
Sure.
For by faith we understand that the worlds were set in order at God's command, so that the visible has its origin in the invisible. So they're telling us that this physical world came from the invisible, right? And you mentioned the 5 worlds.
The 4 or 5. Some people have said 4, other people have said 5, depending on if you count Adam, Kadmon, or
Yeah.
And so like explain. Well, what are the 4 worlds? Like I mean, we know about the Olam Hazeh, Olam Haba, the antediluvian world. We know we on this kind of linear progression going forward in time, but sometimes it's explained. Worlds are also framed in the sense of like this contraction and these concentricities within it. Could you elaborate on that?
Yeah, so the physical world, and this is where it gets a little complicated. I have charts on my website.
Asiya and Berea and all that, yeah.
Yeah, I have charts on my site if you need to borrow that. But
Sure.
the lowest level of our soul, the nefesh, corresponds to Asiya, which is the physical world. It's where we are right now. We're on this table.
Yeah.
And obviously, we know the Creator is not physical.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The Creator is the Ein Sof, as you said earlier,
And the Ein Sof means
without end.
the endless, God
the
the endless.
eternal.
Yeah.
The eternal one.
Okay.
Yeah, without end is like the literal.
Yeah.
The next world up corresponds to the level of Ruach. It's our spirit. And we see that. Like there is a time when Paul will say spirit, and there's a time when they say soul. And in the Gospels as well. And there's a difference between the Nefesh and the Ruach. And that corresponds to the world of Yetzirah. And according to tradition, that's the world of dreams. Some demonic figures and angels play in that space, right? So when people are trying to channel idols, I don't know who the audience will be here, so I'll be very careful, but some parts of the church play dangerously in that space of prophetic tongues. And you're still playing in the space of some entities that are not so helpful to you.
Yeah.
And you can get messed up.
Yeah.
And we see people in the New Testament, like demons are getting cast out. The apostles try to cast one out and they find out it's not the one they thought it was. So Yeshua teaches them and it's a different kind. So there are different classes of these things in angels.
Yeah.
The next one is the neshama. Our next level of soul is neshama, and that is the world of Berea. And Berea is all created things. So there are angels at that level. So this is an interesting thing. The human neshama is actually higher than some of the angels, right?
Yeah.
There's a component of us that's physical, it's coarse, it can be somewhat animalistic at times, like we have physical needs, but there's also that inner essence, which is divine.
Yeah.
And that's a big, I mean, some people cringe at that idea
Yeah.
because in the church, nobody can be divine, but we all do have some level of the Creator in us.
Yes.
Yeah, I've heard, or one of the teachings I've read is that when we pray, it's our neshama that's praying. It's that part of us that communicates with God. It's like, okay, brain, you need to shut off right now. It's time to pray, and I'm going to pray with God. And it's that part of me, that neshama, that's going to make that connection.
It's like Psalm 150. Kol haneshama tahilya hallelujah. It's the same.
The soul you place with the music.
Yeah.
Yeah. So it can be if you're actively putting that thought in your mind, right?
Yeah.
Because you can pray from a very low level, egoic place
Yeah.
and not connect on the level. We have the capacity to
Yeah.
pray mindlessly, and we have the
Right.
capacity to pray with kavana.
Kabbalah,
Yeah.
which that intentional, and that's where I was going. I should have said that.
Yeah.
If we're praying with Kabbalah, intentional focus.
Yeah.
And particularly maybe following the Siddur,
Yeah.
and we've reached that height. We've gone through Pesukei de Zimra. We've recited the blessings of the Shema. Now we're into the Amidah, and we're really intentionally focused there. Would that be a time when our neshama is communicating with God?
100%. Like, and if you're keeping that intention, right? So we go back to the Talmud. It talks about the Amida in the first century.
Yeah.
It would have been a 3-hour prayer. There was 1 hour of meditation before and after, and they spent an hour on what's an 8-minute prayer because they were very deeply into it. But then you'll see people today who are right through it.
Yeah.
And they're finished. So, and this is the essence of the Baal Shem Tov stories.
Yeah.
There is this entire congregation. It's Yom Kippur, and they're praying and they're wailing and they're doing all the traditional things. And there's a kid who comes into the back of the shul, and he just starts playing a flute, or just blowing this little flute. And the parent, people are looking at him in horror. He's distracting them from this traditional thing. And then the parents trying to stop him, and the Baal Shem Tov says, no. What he's doing is from such a high place that it just helped every one of us. So was he doing the right thing? No. Was he doing something from the level of neshama? Absolutely. And knowing how to put those two together is what the tradition of the Kabbalah is about. It's not to, just abandon all tradition and abandon Torah and mitzvot. It's to infuse it with that higher level consciousness.
You see, I could see a doctrinaire replacement theology Christian seeing the tale of the flute player and saying, well, that's joy is replacing, deed, and very, very, I guess absconding with that story to make it into something it's not meant to be.
Or using love as the replacement for everything.
Yeah. It's kind of amorphous.
Kind
It doesn't look like anything, but it's definitely not law. And so, so it basically, the way I understand it is the Ein Sof, the God, the endless. In the beginning, there was nothing but God, and there was only one. He was the singularity. He was everywhere, and then he contracted himself, and within himself, this is where we get the word Tzimtzum, created these 4 worlds, and these 4 worlds are correspondent to different layers of the human soul. So we are made out of this, I guess, the timber of these different realities to some extent, and it corresponds to different levels of the self. So talk about Tikkun Olam.
Yeah, so and I don't want to lose the point that the 5th world, we skipped.
I'm sorry. Yeah, let's go back.
No, we skipped the level of the soul above because it's it's outside of our day-to-day capabilities, but it's still important. And that is to the world of Atzilut. Atzilut means nearness and emanation from the Creator.
Sure.
And the highest one, which you'll see in the Kabbalah, is Adam Kadmon. It's the idea of humanity. Okay. It's what God thought of before He created the first person.
It's all the best intentions and encapsulations of what man ought be in his first draft,
or it's the ideal. It's the
ideal
end point that we will all be brought back to. But the spirit of Messiah is from the level of Adam Kadmon.
That's an interesting point, and this is where it gets controversial a little bit because we obviously Trinitarianism is a mainstay within Christianity, and because a lot of people come from a Christian tradition within Messianic Judaism, that's just generally, it's like that meme where you see Mr. Bean just kind of copying, there's MJ just copying Christianity on a lot of the profound questions. So that could then, instead of maybe understanding okay, there's this Trinitarian Godhead, and they're all co-equal, even though there's passages that's place him as subordinate. We're just going to ignore those, and it's kind of convoluted, and you get these Christians and they're all talking about how they don't understand it, but they all have to kind of agree onto it. Is perhaps maybe Adam Kadmon as a concept of the shining ideal of what man ought be, all that man ought be in his totality, through whom the world was a world through whom reality was created.
Yeah. As it says in Colossians.
Yeah, as it says in Colossians. Is perhaps that not a better understanding, or maybe at least a more Jewish understanding of how to frame the Messiah in a grand cosmic sense than just saying 3 in 1, thrice the fun, you know?
Yeah, I like that. They missed an opportunity for a tagline on that. Yes, and this is where I think we have to be careful, because this is a long discussion in itself.
Sure.
Messianic Judaism has to, at some point, evolve past the frameworks handed to it from the church that came downstream without a kosher oral tradition from the rabbis.
Yeah.
Historically, when the Jewish people were separated from and left, and also the way that the parting of the ways happened, as historians look at it, there was a real loss of tradition.
Yeah.
So you can read in the church fathers when they're trying to describe, like Eusebius talks about how the Jews are talking about this Adam figure who was the spirit of Adam, and he's also Messiah. Like, they understood this at that time. That's some amazing quotes from the church fathers who are explaining what these Jews believed at that time and how it was wrong. And we're talking a few centuries later.
Yeah.
But that was the tradition. So rather than take the logos, John opens with, and come up with our own version, without the rabbinic insights, we create a problem. We create a foothold, which actually caused a lot of division in the church. Because nobody quite knew what to do with the Holy Spirit. As you said, it's confusing.
Yeah, actually, there's been this term floating around at Tikvat from years ago called binitarian monotheism. A lot of people thought that they made the connection of divinity with the Son and the Father, but the Holy Spirit was kind of off doing its own thing. I mean, like a lot of praise songs never praise the Holy Spirit. They praise the Father, they praise the Son, they never praise if they're all three co-equal and worthy of praise, like, why isn't that why isn't that part of, more? It's a lot of things like that come up, and you get, as I said, Christians in a room together, and they can never really formulate a consensus on what the Trinity is or how to really describe it properly.
Yeah, and I personally don't ascribe to what we would call the Trinitarian view.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
I just don't see it in the tradition.
Sure.
I go back to what did the sages, what were they working with at that time? What was in their idea? And I know there are many views, it's very controversial.
Yeah.
But I see this all going back very nicely when you look at the idea of Adam Kadmon, this ideal of humanity, which Adam, the physical Adam, never actually reached that level. He never achieved it.
Yeah.
Because he failed the obedience test.
Yeah.
So in the tradition, it says the soul of Adam, which he never earned, which is Adam Kadmon, which is Yechida, which is the highest level of the soul. We haven't really spoken about that.
Yeah.
That will be given to the human who is like on another level. It's like a Moses.
The
right?
regenerate man. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like a person that's not like your normal person, but it's still not it's still not God.
Yeah.
Right? And that's another piece I think is a big problem in the Messianic world.
Yeah.
Is we don't have any way to really wrestle with the fullness of man and the fullness of God. We don't have the Jewish tradition on what that could be.
Yeah.
So we cling to and opt for what the church, and its various opinions, by the way, have clung to.
Yeah.
But if you put that down,
Yeah.
you step back and you look at the models of the 5 worlds and the 5 levels of the soul. A lot of these problems that Christian theology has kind of brought to the world, because I do think some of them are problems.
Yeah.
Eternal punishment, right? These original sins. Some of these things,
Everlasting conscious torment.
yeah, like these on their face are accepted, but when you really dive in, they're really problematic. But if you step back and you look at these things through the lens of the 5 worlds and the soul, a lot of these problems go away. And then you can say, oh, I might actually understand how to cashier this concept. John is not talking about Jesus, the physical human being present. He's talking about Adam Kadmon, because Adam Kadmon aligns nicely with the Logos concept
Yeah.
in the Jewish world. He's talking about the spirit of Messiah that came down and entered into a person who met the criteria. And then in the tradition, that Yechida, that level of Adam's soul, it says, when Zohar says this, the person will be from the Galilee, right? And when they reach the appropriate level, the Spirit will descend into that person
Yeah.
And they become an aspect of Mashiach ben Yosef, which is a whole different topic.
Yeah, but
we see that in the Gospels.
and we see this sort of spiritual democracy in which he says, "You'll do greater miracles than I, and you'll be chips off the old block when you get there." And so that might indicate something as well. But I want to take a brief second to just kind of flank all this with, or backlight all this with an understanding that when we have friends and family that are Trinitarian, we wish them no ill will and do not see them as corrupt or wrong people. We don't want to frame them as that. And God loves us not for what we know, but the fact that He chooses to love us. And they are our brothers and sisters.
Sure.
We're all created in the image, and I will assume that they are acting in their best ability with good faith.
Yeah.
And, of course, I would hope that it would flow the opposite way too, that they would assume the same thing about us, and that we're not calling for heresy, or that, we're bringing down fiery damnation. These topics, I think, do need to be bravely excavated and talked about.
Yeah, and my point of all of that is, instead of wrestling with something that came out of its original, because we all say, right, we can all agree, and I think a lot more people agree today than maybe 10 years ago, Jesus was a Jew.
Yeah.
He's an Orthodox Jew, and he was a mystical Jew.
Yeah.
He spoke about angels and demons and souls, and he was very much an Orthodox Jew all of his life, even after, right?
Yeah.
Like every depiction of him, he's still Jewish.
Yeah.
Right? Everything he's doing. So, okay, we can agree on that today. We couldn't maybe a few years ago, 10, 15, 20 years ago.
Yeah.
What does that mean, though?
How far do you take it?
Yeah, right. How far do you want to take it? That's
Yeah.
the question.
Yeah.
Are you comfortable knowing that everything that, let's say, X denomination believes on the simple level is useful, but when you start getting to those other levels, you have problems.
Yeah.
You've now, the word shituf, right? Confusion.
Confusion.
You've
Yeah.
confused the idea of God. You've brought, and this is the problem Judaism has with Messianic Judaism by proxy to Christianity, is that you now have brought God down into the muck and the mire, to the physical, in a way that degrades Him, and you've done it in a Jewish setting. So in some ways,
It's wildly offensive.
yeah, in some ways, Jews have no problem with most Christians, right?
Because that's to be expected.
Yeah, God will fix that. Maimonides says God will fix Christianity and Islam in the future, and those things will be corrected, but they have the general gist of it right. Monotheism has been spreading all this time, and God will one day refine it, and it's good.
Yeah.
But when you bring that into the synagogue setting, that's where it becomes a problem, because now you've done something in this pool, and Israel has a different job than other nations, right?
Yeah. So you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was going to ask. I mean, when you say a second ago, when we're talking about Yeshua being an Orthodox Jew, and your response to Drake was, well, it kind of also depends on how far you want to take that idea. And well, I'm confident that you're attributing a lot of these ideas of Kabbalah to Yeshua himself. And I guess my question is, are we attributing any of that anachronistically? And I assume our audience knows what an anachronism is.
Yeah.
So there is a very real risk of taking the writings of a current rabbi and all of the language and depth that they explain a concept today.
And retrojecting it.
Yeah, and saying Yeshua knew all of that back then. That's a problem. And you will see that out there. You'll see people who, they go very deeply into one rabbi's particular view of something and say, oh, this is exactly what they were saying. So you do have to find, you can do this through the Midrash. Sometimes the Midrash is the vehicle between. You can find the Midrash and when it was dated, who's it attributed to, and you can track back and say, okay, no, this goes back that far. Right? But then you will see things, and I have some sources we can look at later just to kind of like further drive my point.
Sure.
You'll see some things written by the Arizal, who he attributes them to the sages. He goes back and says, our sages taught this in the Talmud. You'll go into the Talmud and read and say, I don't see it explained that way. Of course, he's talking about the whole oral tradition behind it. The Talmud itself is veiled. But you will see, oh man, that's exactly what John is writing about. But there is no explanation of that technically anywhere else. So you can say those, to me, look like that's a match. That's a very powerful match. The way they're using the words, the same terminology, the essence of it, you can see that there's some continuity.
Sure.
So Judaism goes.
So in other words, there has to be a common source somewhere
Yeah.
for John to be writing about it and the rabbis to be elaborating on it centuries later.
Yeah.
Sure.
And the source is that oral tradition, which a lot of it is still oral. I mean, I have a friend who was in a yeshiva in Jerusalem, and he has a whole world of insights about the New Testament and people in the New Testament that have never been written down.
Yeah.
They've been passed down through the Jewish communities
Yeah.
all this time. It's still ongoing oral tradition.
Are they positive insights or?
Some of them are.
Yeah.
Yeah. Peter was well liked, and we see Peter's prayer, Nishmat. It's
Yeah.
in the Siddur. It's
Right.
in Orthodox Siddur. So Peter has a good rapport. Paul's not so much, but they know of his interactions with.
Paul's viewed as the founder of Christianity.
Yeah.
But they still see him as a student of Rabban Gamliel, and there are these discussions and dialogues that I was told about secondhand, that this oral tradition still goes on, right? So I think we're starting to see people in that world. There's an author I really like. It's anonymous. He goes under the name Mishnah Rabbeinu. You can find him on Amazon.
Yeah.
He's an Orthodox rabbi who I won't say much more about him so we don't out him, but he shares some of the insights from this vast tradition, reframing how Paul is teaching an idea and a concept. And this is what we need more of. We don't need people like myself who are coming into this from all weird angles.
Yeah.
We need people who have lived in that space to come out and start reimagining, re-envisioning, rereading these texts
Yeah.
and drawing those connections. I think we're at the doorstep of it, but the door is opening quickly.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm going to skip ahead now to Tikkun Olam.
Yep.
So let's talk about that. That's another mystical concept, I think, outlined by the Arizal as well. Correct?
It is, yeah, and it's a very popular concept actually, Tikkun Olam, because it makes a good bumper sticker, right?
I've heard Christians use it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Somebody.
Why don't you define what it is?
Yeah. So Tikkun means to repair. It actually has two meanings. We'll come back to it, but Tikkun generally means to repair, and Olam is the word for world, which we were talking about earlier, the worlds, right? So we're not in the Olam Haba. We're in the Olam Hazeh, so tikkuning, repairing this world so that we can get to the Olam Haba is what we're trying to get it to match that, as Yeshua says, on earth as it is in heaven.
That is a Tikkun Olam prayer. We're trying to make this world as much like the world to come as possible.
Exactly.
Through our
So
deeds.
on a more technical level, it's the work of repairing the soul damage that we have from mistakes in our life, right? All the things that we have failed to do correctly. Tikkun Olam is, I'm doing a great job at waking up and praying, but I'm not doing it at the level I could be doing it. I'm breezing through it to get to work.
Yeah.
So Tikkun Olam could be
Right here in a bag of chips, baby.
right. Yeah, right. Tikkun Olam could be not having chips, right? Or like whatever, like when you're eating when you're saying your prayer, or waking up 20, 30 minutes earlier and taking your time going through the words. It can be as personal and secret as that. Tikkun Olam, Yeshua says this as well. It doesn't have to be overt. Giving in secret. So your Father knows. Like that is a level of Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam is picking up a piece of trash that's blowing in front of you. Take that opportunity, bend over, pick it up. Don't make a big deal of it. Don't do it out in public. Don't Facebook live stream yourself. Just do it.
Yeah.
Tikkun Olam is it's as deep and powerful as we want it to be, but it's consciously recognizing that we're here on this earth to tikkun this world.
Yeah.
We're not here to wait to be taken off this planet, right?
The evacuation theology.
Right.
It's all going to burn. God was defeated here, and so he's evacuating all of his soldiers because evil won the world that he created, and so he's just going to drop a nuke on it and
yeah.
You know, we could say that, you know, for a mindset that that desires tikkun, or that we want to make this world as much like the world to come as possible. That says, for people that are like that, they have a mentality for life. Whereas those that are constantly thinking about the world to come and forgetting about this world, they're focused on death.
Yes.
And I think God wants us focused on life, living in the here and now.
Yeah.
Even Yeshua seems in his Sermon on the Mount, of all things, he talks about living in the here and now and not
Doing things properly and living life.
not worried about the world to come. You need to worry about the here and now, and,
sure.
and live your life appropriately.
Yeah.
And I find in Christianity, especially, their mentality seems to be the opposite. They're focused on, they have a death mindset.
You know,
I can't wait to get to the sweet by and by.
This place isn't my home.
Yeah.
And so this is...
It's almost Eastern in a sense. Like, I'm just going to escape the samsara wheel and climb up the snakes and ladders, and all this is going to, as I said, all this is going to burn, and no point in holding on to it, right?
But I would even say the Eastern mindset recognizes the cycle of everything. So that eventually you're going to have to wrestle with that issue.
Yeah, yeah.
Whereas the Western mind thinks that we think in a very linear way. Like we're going to, on the line of time, we're going to live this little blip here, and then depending on how we believe something or not, we're going to spend the rest of this line in one place or another. So like one place or another, right? So, but I think what you're saying is important. That's also why in the earlier centuries, around the time of Yeshua, people weren't being taught certain level of Kabbalah because it would distract them from the actual things you need to do in life.
Yeah.
And the sages talk about that.
Yeah. Gilgul, you're talking about life, you're talking about now, you're talking about these things. So what is that concept, and explain that?
Yeah, so you went right for the big topic, Gilgul. So Gilgul in Jewish tradition it's a concept that people, I'm going to say the word that it translates to, and it's already going to fracture the listeners into whether they have understood this concept or not. It's going to take them down a path. I suggest everyone resist the urge to assume we understand the concept when I define Gilgul as reincarnation, because it's not the same as Eastern reincarnation. The popular 60s guru introduced ideas that we've become accustomed to understanding in our modern culture. Gilgul is this idea that on some level, it's a very deep idea. I'll go into some examples here. It's a very deep idea that if we are in this world of duality, the world of Asiya, the world of physicality is dualistic.
Yes.
We have to struggle with good and evil, light and darkness, right and wrong. There are actual opposites in the world of duality. As you go up these worlds and you get closer to the Creator, everything becomes more unified until you get to the Creator where there's no end, there's no differentiation. But in these worlds, as we go up, and James says this, 1:17, all good and perfect things are from the Creator, from which from his perspective, there's no differentiation, right? The Father of lights.
Yes.
So as we move closer to the light of the Creator, everything is oneness.
Yeah.
So that means every human on earth, our soul is connected. Call it quantum entanglement, the physics term, which is now on the table, which actually makes a lot of sense in this context. All of our souls are connected. And we know that because we were all created by the Creator, right? So as long as we can agree on that, Gilgul is the idea that parts of our soul are can become entangled at different levels with other souls throughout time.
Yes.
That means our existence our family and our friends are not happenstance. We might all be from the same soul group, and we may be all part of a mission.
Sure.
Like Drake, you and I, we met at this point in our life. Later, right, only in a couple of years.
Yeah.
That is not an accident. The Creator said at this point, when these two have reached a certain level, this community will have these people a part of it.
Yeah.
Because they have a mission to Tikkun Olam. See how these all go together? So the idea of Gilgul is that your soul has kind of a life outside of what you can perceive.
Yeah.
And sometimes a part of your soul might be connected to someone on earth. But you're not living with that person at that time. A person's soul can kind of transmute that barrier at some level.
Transcend
or
the
another.
barrier, yeah.
Now, there are parts of the Jewish tradition that teach that if you live a terrible life, you've not understood, God will give you a chance to take that part of your soul and it can become connected to somebody in a new life, or it can go back through some kind of existence. And we haven't talked about this yet.
So
but
almost like a
gematria-
vicarious living through somebody else
Yeah.
to some extent.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
the
Okay.
gematria for Gilgul is the same as chesed. So it's a kindness. And gematria is the numerical value of a Hebrew word.
God's throwing you a bone.
Yeah, it's seen as it's an unfortunate reality, but it's a way to
You're out on parole.
fix the problem you didn't fix in your life. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you'll see the apostles assume this, and Jesus doesn't deny it or confirm it. It's already in the thought. Hey, there's a man who's blind. Who sinned, he or his parents? Right? They're asking.
Yeah.
Where did they get that assumption from?
Yeah.
Another very popular idea, and so by the way, he doesn't answer, hey, that's foolish. Of course he didn't sin. That doesn't exist. He says he answers in a way that to me aligns with a couple passages in the Zohar that say this person may have entered this life in this state because there's work to be done.
So
There's an opportunity.
And this is where the word tikkun, the second valence of the term, would come in. You're going and making a soul tikkun on this mission of Gilgul, and so you actually come back with a mission, or I guess come into the next this next life or what have you. I'm using these terms very guardedly because I don't want to sound like some sort of Hindu holy man.
No.
Yeah, so that does seem. That does seem to have a lot of, I guess, interplay between Gilgul and Tikkun. They seem to kind of be twins. They seem to kind of go hand in hand with each other.
Yeah, so the other definition of tikkun, litakim, is to improve or to perfect.
Yeah.
So repair is what we typically consider.
Sure.
But you can also go beyond repair into improving. And, in the Jewish tradition, I was learning with a guy, I told you, my friend from Aish, Orthodox Jew all of his life, his family, many generations. And I asked him about Gilgul because a lot of these concepts, just for the listener's sake, I didn't love them at first. I really resisted them for a long time until I just couldn't stop seeing, and I kept feeling like, the Creator is really pushing me to engage with this idea.
Sure.
And I asked him, and he's not a Kabbalist. He's not someone who even studies this material. There's a lot of it that's already in his Orthodox worldview. And I said, what do you think about Gilgul? And he said, oh, that's like, we learned that as little kids. It's like, yeah.
Like snakes and ladders, yeah.
Yeah, he's like, we learned that as kids. I mean, the Talmud talks about many stories. And so I realized, wow, my resistance is a late Western one.
There is something very interesting when Yehuda, he throws his brother in the pit with his other brothers in a conspiracy of, let's just get rid of this guy. And when he does, it says in the following that he went down from amongst his brothers. And then in a few other places in the text following, it keeps using the word Judah, his name associated with down. So it's like his brother's going down in the pit, and he's going down in the pit with him. And you talk about that sense of soul entanglement. It's like he wronged him, and now he is in sort of like this pit of his own that he can't escape. So that's interesting. The Bible does seem to hint that you are wronged, that a person who is wronged does share then a commonality, a communion with the person that has wronged them. Or maybe just in the case of a strong bond, David and Jonathan, for example. People have said that their souls are knit, and you have in the New Testament you have Paul, a Benjamite, vouching for a man from Judah. Rehearsing the same story and over again. And so it's like there maybe is, blood is thicker than water, and there is a soul tie that people have. And
I think that there are passages that are pretty overt. In my opinion, Yeshua's asking his disciples, who do you say I am? And the answers that they give before Peter gives his answer are 100% Gilgul related.
Mm-hmm.
Some say you're John the Baptist. How is that possible? He
Yeah.
just died
Yeah.
like a little bit ago.
Yeah.
Some say you're Elijah, or they even think that John's Elijah. Yeshua says John's Elijah.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what are we to do with those? And the Torah tradition talks about the connection between Elijah and Pinchas, who
Yeah.
spears Cosby and Zimri.
Yeah.
We see it in the tradition. And a lot of these ideas that are in the Bible. This again is why I know we've had conversations. This could be, I'm sure it will be its own show, Sola Scriptura.
Yeah.
Concepts like heaven, hell, reward and punishment, Gehenna. Gehenna is kind of like related there. Angels, demons, Messiah.
Mm-hmm.
You'll never find them explained in any of the Bible, whether your Bible stops, the Hebrew Bible, or continues into the New Testament. They're not explained. All of this is in the rabbinic tradition.
Yeah.
Even the word, Messiah is not a word that's ever used in the Tanakh as the global redeemer type figure. It's always a person who's just anointed.
Yeah.
Mashiach is somebody, David, it's Cyrus at one point, a Gentile.
Yeah.
So where did those ideas come from? Which made me realize when I started this journey, there's a lot more I don't have access to. I need to explore it.
Yeshua is more redolent, I think, in a rabbinic tradition than he is in the Tanakh, by far.
Yeah.
But so we're coming up on time, but now is, I think, a good stopping point. We're going to continue this conversation to the next episode, but I just wanted to say, James, thanks for spending this time with us and sharing these thoughts. You are an absolute gem. It's a joy to talk to you. It's been, gosh knows, 2 hours. Maybe this will be trimmed down. I don't know. But time flies when you're having fun. So we'll talk to you next time and see you then.
Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
We're coming to that time of the show again. This is looked forward to by lots of you out there, and we never want to disappoint. And the people we seek out online, some of the yahoos, they never disappoint either. So
That's all right.
yeah. Anyway, so we're now in the segment of the Messianic Wall of Weird. So Messianic Wall of Weird is where we discuss all of the crazies, all of the offbeat folks that give Messianic Judaism a bad name. And so, again, we don't want to badmouth anybody, but at the same time, we have to disavow. Disavowing is very important. We have a lot, as I said before, we attract eccentric people, insane people, genius people, and we have to be able to kind of sift a little bit and say, okay, we don't necessarily go along with that. And so the Messianic Wall of Weird, while it's fun, it's also functional. We need to draw a line in the sand in Messianic Judaism and say, not only what we are, but sometimes
what
things
we're
that,
not.
yeah, this is what we're not. Things that do not qualify. And exactly. So with that said, David, I believe you have today's theme. What is it?
Well, in looking around, there's just so much to choose from when I look around out there. It's just never ending. And I'm looking forward to when our listeners will be giving us ideas of things that we hadn't thought about. But today's Wall of Weird topic I want to discuss is the idea of Messianic Goyim, if I can call them that, Messianic Gentiles, because no Jew would do this.
I don't know. There might be some eccentric.
Maybe.
Yeah, so
maybe.
I don't
maybe, but maybe they're just ignorant.
The night is young.
They're they see these Messianic Gentiles doing it and think, oh, well, that's what we're supposed to do.
So what are they doing?
They're wearing tzitzit on their belt loops, which is just weird.
Weird. Okay. So to those of you who don't really know what we're talking about, the Torah itself says, and Hashem says to Moses, saying, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them that they must make for themselves tzitzit, that is tassels, on the corners of their garments for all generations." And this string it'll be a string, it'll be a tassel, it'll have techelet. Sometimes
Techelet is a color of blue.
Color of blue, yeah. It's like a snail, chidason.
Right. It's supposed to represent the color of the sky, which
color of the
represents
sky.
the domain of heaven.
Others have said that it's kind of correspondent to the priestly shatnas, the shat that is the mixed fiber that is on the priestly garment. So like every Israelite is a priest, he remembers that he's holy whenever he sees that, and so it's sort of like a device used to I guess, a fence to constrain one's actions and things of that nature, to remember that one is, in some sense, a priest, even though it's a nation of priests. And
because you're to look, the scripture says you're to look upon it, the tzitzit, and not go astray after your own heart and your own eyes. So instead of, it comes in response to the children of Israel coming back from the land of Canaan, having spied it out, and they looked upon or saw the giants of the land and said, "Oh, the land is great, but it's full of giants, and we can't go in there." And we were grasshoppers in our own eyes, and so we were in their eyes too. Oh, they kind of went too far in making that comment. But the point is, in response to that, God gives them this command to look upon the tzitzit instead, and to remember all the commands of God.
Yeah. Yeah, so you can find this in Bamidbar, Numbers, as well as Devarim. There's two...
Numbers chapter 15.
Yes, Numbers 15 and Bamidbar. Devarim, Deuteronomy 22. I'm looking at the Sepharia translation, by the way. So it's typically associated with, it uses this word kanaf, which means the border, the corner of the corner of the garment. So this is, it was probably different back then in the ancient world, but today you wear a talit. This is a garment that is you throw it over yourself while you're praying, and you wear it during synagogue services, worn by Jewish men primarily, but some more liberal Judaisms, women might wear them, like in Reform Judaism, for example, maybe like a female rabbi, for example. But ultimately, it has that function in a synagogue, and not only that, but others, in maybe perhaps more Orthodox communities, might wear it in the form of a shirt called a talit katan, which is something, it's kind of like almost an undershirt, and you'd wear it under something else, and
correct,
the tassels, the tzitzit would hang out the bottom, and it would make it visible. And so
that particular garment doesn't have any sides to it. No. So it's basically like one long rectangular piece of cloth with a head,
like
a hole for the head in the middle.
Head,
So you put it over your head, and then the half of the rectangular garment comes down in your front side, and the other half of the rectangular piece of garment goes across your back.
Yeah.
And then on each of the four corners, there are these four fringes, these what are called tzitzit.
Yes. So,
and by the way, they wear this. You only wear the talit when during the day when you're praying, but the talit katan, as you mentioned, which is this four-cornered garment, that's like an undershirt, you wear it basically 24/7. I think some people even sleep in it.
Yeah. It all depends, but those are some of the factoids that you need to know about how these are worn and how they factor into Jewish life. And so different synagogues, for example, in MJ, have expressed this differently. Like if you're a Gentile, you probably wouldn't wear it. It wouldn't be appropriate to wear it at in such a setting. Now, we have the First Amendment. You can do whatever you want in America, freedom of religion. So at home you can do whatever. Nobody can stop you. But at Tikvat, for example, we would kind of prefer to keep that distinction, and that's something that we've tried to hew to.
Right. It's more to me and to many. Probably to you as well, and many like us that are not Jewish. I would look at that particular commandment and say, man, that's a Jewish identity marker. There are certain commandments that are like, okay, that's specifically for the children of Israel. And that's one in particular I would identify as, well, that's really not for the nations. That's for the children of Israel specifically as an identity marker.
Now, I have heard some rabbis that would allow Gentiles to, for example, lay tefillin, or those, for those of you that don't know what those are, those black little prayer boxes that you tethered to the head and to the arm. They would allow them to do that, but perhaps they wouldn't say the baracha, they wouldn't say the blessing, or they would say something different. There are sometimes are allowances, but those tend to be sort of minority opinions.
Right.
And so in synagogue life, for example, a Gentile ought to, if he's coming to a synagogue out of propriety, wear something to cover his head, oftentimes a kippah. So if you see a president come and speak at a synagogue, or a senator come and speak at a synagogue who's not Jewish, he'll put on a kippah because out of reverence for the building. That's not necessarily so much a Jewish identity marker as it is you're in holy space.
Right.
You have to cover your head, and that's just done out of veneration and respect for the nature of the space. So those are some of the, I guess, the rules and ins and outs that we're aware of about, I guess, the etiquette.
Well,
Yeah.
or I wouldn't even say the etiquette. I would call it the halakha regarding the tzitzit, especially.
Yeah.
The halakha, the Jewish law
Yeah.
requires, that the tzitzit be hung from this four-cornered garment.
Yeah.
And even the prayer shawl, the talit that you wear during the prayer service, it's a four-cornered garment.
Well, I say etiquette because it's not just a matter of breaking a commandment, because, people don't get offended necessarily or rankled if you run a red light. It's like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, but nobody's going to get offended that you ran a red light, in traffic. So, but when it comes to, let's say, women in some synagogues wearing a talis, people would be offended.
Right.
Now, there's this sort of, I don't know how you call it, but there's this fad in Messianic Judaism. I guess it's in novices. I've seen novices do things like this with talises, where they would take the tzitzit and they would attach it to their belt loops themselves.
Correct.
So this is not a four-cornered garment to put it on your pants.
Right. The pants are not a four-cornered garment.
Not only that, but I'm not even sure if is denim like a mixed garment. I have no idea if it's shot.
Denim is typically 100% cotton.
Okay, well that's good. Well, at least that part of the commandment is being satisfied.
Right.
But my point is, I forgot. Shatnez, for those of you who don't know what shatnez is mixed fibers, which is, of course,
it's mixing wool and linen together.
Yeah.
It's basically, wool is from an animal and linen is from a plant.
It's flax, yeah.
And so you wouldn't mix those. I mean, God has boundaries in nature.
Yeah.
And he expects us to honor those boundaries.
Yeah.
For example, we just talked about this past week, the Parsha was that of Noah, but the very end of that Parsha, it talks about the Tower of Babel. And what happened in the Tower of Babel, they were crossing a boundary. They were trying to, the heavens are God's domain, and the earth has been given to the children of men.
Yeah.
But instead, man was trying to enter into the realm of God.
Yeah.
So they were dishonoring that boundary that God had established. So Shatnaz is a kind of one of those boundary type of things. We're to honor that.
Yeah, exactly. Now, there are some rabbinic writings I've encountered throughout the years that would say, like, in the Messianic age, Gentiles will be taught the mitzvah of laying the tefillin and things like that. And that's all something to be hoped for, but, don't put the cart before the horse. So, but either way, it's like, okay, if you're going to do that as a Gentile, at least do it right. And at least make a good show of it.
Don't do it out of ignorance. That's what we see.
Yeah. So if you really insist on wearing a tallis out in public, okay, fine. Don't put it on your belt loop. It makes you look like a yokel.
Or here's something else I've seen.
Yeah.
I've seen sometimes people, they put them on their belt loops and they walk about without a kippah on or without any kind of a head covering.
If you're going, that's another thing. If you're going to wear a tallis, you have to wear a kippah.
Yes.
Now, I was actually,
and don't go into McDonald's with it.
Oh my gosh, that actually happened to somebody. So okay, here's something else. I used to go to this Irish pub, and they had the greatest fish and chips in the world. And so it's like this big slab of cod. It was greasy and yummy. We used to go there in Hanukkah because, oil and everything, But I was sitting out. I used to go there to read, actually. I did my Kindle and everything, and I forget what I was reading. But I'd order maybe like a beer or wine, and I'm sitting there, and I'm on this patio, and there's all these other patrons there with me. Of course, I'm not wearing a kippah because, I'm out and I'm not in synagogue, and I'm just a regular guy out in the world right now. And in walks in this fellow, very, very winsome gentleman, and he's wearing like around him, like a stole, wrapped around him, a talus, but he's not wearing a kippah.
Oh my gosh!
And yeah, and
it's embarrassing.
It's embarrassing. And so he sat out on the patio, and he's wearing this thing around him. It's like the Superman cape out in public. And you can wear a talis katan. If you were wearing a talit katan, that's more of an understated, tasteful. He could have done that.
He's disrespecting the talit itself.
But he's going to a non-kosher restaurant, so at least take that off and don't disrespect.
Right, it's like walking in. I mean.
Yeah.
Imagine walking into, let's say you had to clean a septic tank.
Oh, yeah.
And you did so while reading your Bible and having a tallit on. And
yeah. You're disrespecting. Yeah,
you're
exactly.
going to take communion while you're cleaning out the septic tank.
It seems a bit. Yeah. So at least if you're going to don't embarrass Judaism along with whatever you're doing. And so I understand that you live in the world and you won't always be able to keep perfect kosher. You won't always be able to do these things. But try to leave Judaism blameless. And that was so I talked to the guy, and he was a nice guy, nothing wrong with him as far as his kindness, a very winsome, genial fellow.
But I'm sure he was ignorant.
Oh, he said, "Oh yeah, my son just got me into this," and I'm like thinking, "Oh my gosh!" And so I told him, maybe you could not wear this, and I don't know how deeply he's going to delve into it, but ultimately we say this because when you're in Messianic Judaism, all eyes are on us and how we behave and how we conduct ourselves. And if we're doing zany things and engaged in all sorts of shenanigans, then the larger Jewish community is going to look at that and say, look, they're just abusing our sancta and they're acting like clowns, and you just erected one more barrier between yourself and the Jewish community. So belt loops and tzitzit, don't do it.
Yeah, or, here's another one I see. Clip-on tzitzit. Like a clip-on tie, instead of a belt loop, it has a clip on it, and you clip that to your belt. Or, the halakha calls for certain colors of the tzitzit.
Oh, yeah.
It's going to be either 100% white, or it's going to be of the 8 threads that make up the tzitzit. One of them will be blue.
Yeah.
And the rest will be white.
Exactly.
And I have seen multicolored tzitzit.
Orange, yellow, yeah.
Red. Oh, let's do a red one for Yeshua, because we want to represent the blood of Yeshua.
Yeah.
So we need a red one.
Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah.
I knew a guy once. He wore tzitzit on the collar of his shirt.
So like where the buttons were supposed to be buttons?
Yes,
yeah,
exactly.
Oh, gosh.
Like he just sort of looped them around the buttons of his button-down shirt, and wore them up there like it was a turquoise necklace or something.
Yeah, he should make just spring for a bolo tie.
Like a bow tie,
Get a bolo tie. Get one of those Texan bolo ties that, and put tzitzit on it and just cut with it. So I don't know. That's our stance. Again, we say here this is our official position at MJ Next. If you're an MJ, we ask you, we beseech you straight up, when it comes to belt loops and tzitzit,
clip-ons and tzitzit, different colors of tzitzit,
please refrain. Do not do that.
Yes.
Ever in Messianic Jewish public life or Jewish life or any public life at all representing Messianic Judaism. And that's why belt loop tzitzit belong
on the Messianic Wall of Weird.
Well, that's it for today at MJ Next. Tune in for part 2 of this engaging interview with James Ballard on the role of mysticism in Messianic Judaism. I'm your host, Drake Dunaway.
And I'm your co-host, David Cook. Find us at mjnext.fm and subscribe today. Thanks for joining us, and remember to join us for part 2.